Welcome back, everyone. It's been a while. Today's video, we're going to look at 8 reasons I think you are not ready to date as a Christian man or woman. But if you are not a Christian, I think you'll still get value from this video, so I think you'll stick around. So let's dive right in. First of all, reason 1 why I don't think you're ready to date. You think singleness is a curse to be escaped or a hole to be rescued from. I see this sentiment a lot on Our Christian Dating and some other places online where lonely singles are writing in to discuss their frustration. And the truth is, if you're viewing singleness in these highly negative terms, singleness is just inherently bad, inherently awful. It's basically a curse. Then, you may have turned relationships into an idol, or at least the concept of what you think a relationship will be. And you're going to be in for a rude awakening, but that's another topic. So litmus test for kind of whether you fall into this category. If I ask you what are the benefits or the perks or the blessings of singleness, are you able to quickly give a definitive, affirmative answer of what these benefits, perks, or blessings are? Or do you just sit there and think, wow, yeah, there's nothing. This is just awful. I'm not going to go over the benefits of singleness. They should be obvious to you, especially if you're a Christian. 1 Corinthians 7 Paul is very clear that he wishes more Christians were like him, single, since you are able to focus more time on ministry. But another reason why you don't want to have this mindset isn't just that it's unbiblical, but also that it breeds desperation. And when you're dating out of desperation, you're inevitably going to make poor decisions. You're going to rush into something. You're going to end up with someone that you're not compatible with, or you're just going to miss out on someone high value, because high value people can recognize when the other person is desperate and they're not going to be attracted to that. Classic example is the desperate man who's tripping over himself to be in a relationship with a woman. High value women are going to recognize that desperation. It's going to be a turnoff. It's going to be unattractive. So this mindset in no way, shape, or form is going to benefit you, even in terms of finding a relationship. You might get into a relationship faster as a result, but it's likely to be a low quality relationship or an unhealthy one. So that's my first reason. Second reason, you view marriage as a finish line for your struggles or a solution to your deepest problems. A lot of examples I could give here. Classic one traditionally associated with men is sexual struggles. This idea that once I'm married, I'm no longer going to struggle with X. It could be porn, masturbation, whatever, some form of fornication. And the reality, the cold, hard reality, is that if you struggle with some kind of sexual sin before you're married, you're probably going to struggle with it after you're married. And that's for a pretty simple reason. If you view every person as having certain tanks or vessels that need to be filled in order to be satisfied, marital intimacy is not going to fill up the lust tank that you've been filling up for years with porn, masturbation, whatever. Porn and masturbation are still going to continue to be the means by which that tank is going to be filled. So I'm not going to go into a long tangent on sexual sin and how much of it you should try to eradicate before marriage, etc. I just don't want you to be naive on this point. If you have sexual struggles now, marriage is not going to be a finish line for those. Now, marriage is going to help to some extent. It's also pretty clear in 1 Corinthians 7. It is true that marriage is part of the solution to sexual struggles, to burning desire, but by no means is it a finish line or kind of an ultimate panacea for that difficulty. Next up, an example, emotional neediness. So that's pretty general. That can take many forms, but just this idea that once I'm in a relationship, that hole in my life, that void is going to be filled. And truth is that marital loneliness is very much a thing. So if you think loneliness as a single is painful, wait until you experience loneliness in a marriage. And if you want to have some lower level solution to filling that void rather than just, another person in your life, then you might find that marriage is very dissatisfying or even extremely painful when that need is not met. Again, not denying, of course, that emotional needs can be and will be met in marriage. We're just talking more about this level of idolatry, thinking that marriage is going to be this ultimate solution to that problem in your life. And then next up, very serious issue, and that's unresolved past trauma. I should have put in the word unresolved here. Unresolved past trauma, because lots of people have had past trauma. They have dealt with it. They've overcome it. The example I'm going to focus on here is male trust issues. Since we had a stereotypically male example earlier, we'll do a stereotypically female example. The one of male trust issues may be due to sexual assault, molestation, infidelity, betrayal, some sort of situation like that. And a woman who has those kind of trust issues, male trust issues, or trust issues associated with romance or sexual intimacy, it is very, very dangerous if she is viewing marriage as the situation where her husband is going to be the knight in shining armor that comes in and slays the dragons of her past. Or another way I've heard it put, and this is a quite accurate, I would say, way of thinking about it, is oftentimes with a woman with unresolved trauma, the current man, the new man, the now husband, whatever, is expected to atone for the sins of past men. And that's not going to work. That's not going to happen. That is a recipe for disaster, for failure. There's only one man that can obviously atone for sins. That's Jesus Christ. He has to be the foundation for how you're dealing with past trauma. But as far as this trauma goes, what is really happening when you bring that into a relationship and it's not resolved? Well, it's the naive mindset is to go to Galatians, where it says, bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. And I'm not going to deny that there's some ways or aspects through which a husband can support his wife, or will support a wife who's had issues. He's going to provide some amount of security, comfort, or whatever. But if we're talking about past trauma that is serious and is unresolved, then really what is more likely to happen is that when she enters into a relationship, that man is going to become a co-victim of her past trauma. That baggage is now not just her baggage, but it is also baggage that is, greatly affecting him. Again, recipe for an unhealthy marriage and most likely a failed marriage. All right, let's go to the third point. You have a life mission that requires marriage to be fulfilled. So, simple litmus test. What is your life mission? Could you articulate it right now? And once you can articulate it, does it involve a man? Does it involve a woman? Does it involve marriage? Does it involve some kind of sexual or romantic relationship? If it does, then I would argue that you are not in a place to enter into a long-term, intentional long-term dating relationship leading to marriage. You need to have a life mission that doesn't require those things in order to be fulfilled. And, this does tie into the previous point, kind of this idea that marriage is a finish line. Your life mission cannot just be get married. That's not biblical. And it also ties into the earlier point about desperation. It's just straight up unattractive. So men, you want to be the kind of man that a high value Christian woman is going to look at and say, that guy knows where he's going. That guy is about his mission, and I want to join him. I want to be part of that. I want to be with him. I want to assist him. I want to support him. That's attractive to high value Christian women, not a man who, she metaphorically walks up to him, makes it known that she's available. He looks at her, he's enamored, and he just totally drops whatever he's doing. He stops his, forward march to which hopefully should be in a Godward direction. He just drops everything and just turns to her and just stares at her and is like, oh, here you are, the thing that was going to make me happy. Oh, I've made it. Okay, good. We're done. No, instead, a godly man, an attractive man, is going to be marching in this Godward direction, this Godward trajectory. And again, metaphorically speaking, this woman's going to approach, make it clear that she's available, and he's just going to say, okay, I'm going here. This is where I'm going. Are you coming with me? That's what it should look like. And of course, that life mission, it needs to, in some sense, some way, begin with the ultimate mission that Jesus gave every Christian, which is the Great Commission. That's at the most high level, the most general sense, this idea of making Jesus more famous. But then, each person is going to have a specific way that they plan on fulfilling that mission, that they plan on making Jesus more famous, making his beauty known, his glory known. And ideally, I shouldn't even say ideally, no, you need to have in your mind a clear articulation of what that's going to look like in your life. So, the Westminster Confession of Faith, first question in the shorter catechism, what is the chief end of man? To glorify God and enjoy him forever. That's not sufficient. You don't just say, that's what I'm about. I'm just about glorifying God and enjoying him. Like, no, have something specific. What is that going to look like in terms of your ministry, your work, your family, etc.? All right, let's go to the next one. Number 4. So I'm kind of lumping in a few different ideas here related to timeline or pressure. So you're in a rush to get married. You think you're on a clock, so to speak, or you feel pressured to be in a relationship. And as a result, you're going to be in a relationship more out of duty than because someone actually adds value to your life and you add value to their life, and you're going to be fulfilling a godly mission together. So I'll give you a specific example I saw once in a dating profile from a woman, and her list of deal breakers and preferences was basically this declaration that if we date, we're going to be married in 1 year. Just bluntly, we're going to be married in 1 year. Just so you know. Why? That's not something that you want to insist on. You end up being married in 1 year, okay, there's legitimate times and reasons why that can happen, but to insist upon it, that's concerning. And of course, if you looked in her profile, it was pretty obvious why she decided that this timeline was essential. Again, I don't think that's a good look. I think that'd be a real eyebrow raiser for high value Christian men. So, an example though of where that pressure can come from for women, but also for men, is related to children. Could be related to a biological clock if you're a woman, or for both men and women, pressure from parents who are wanting grandchildren, or maybe you're just seeing friends and family around you getting married, having children, and you feel like you're being left out. FOMO. So again, you might end up in a position where you feel pressured to date, and you're not dating because this relationship is going to add value to your life at this point in time, or you're going to add value to someone else's life again in order to fulfill this godly life mission, and to fulfill certain needs. I shouldn't say needs. Marriage isn't essential, but certain wants. It's undeniable that most people want to be married because it's going to assist in fulfilling them in certain ways. So, are you dating out of duty? Do you feel like you're dating out of duty? You shouldn't be dating then. A specific way that pressure can manifest itself is when somebody puts out the line like choose me or lose me. They're applying pressure. And it's not always bad to apply pressure. I'm not saying that somebody applying pressure to you means it's a red flag. You need to run for the hills. But if you are in this place where you're being pressured, you do need to step back and act. Is this a healthy pressure? Is this a good pressure that's could result in a healthy, good relationship? Or, like I said, are you just going to end up dating out of duty or obligation because you feel bad? Okay. Fifth point. You are not ready to date for a long-term relationship or marriage if you are emotionally immature. A lot could be said here. Emotional maturity is not a vague topic. We think of emotions being vague, and yeah, they can be, but emotional maturity has a specific definition, at least in my mind. Emotional immaturity means that your emotions are ruled or dictated by your circumstances and the opinions of others. So if you've ever lived with someone like that, or maybe you are that type of person and you know it, you might know that you can be miserable to live with. But if you've lived with someone like that, you know how miserable that can be. And so you can imagine how that misery can be compounded when you are married to someone, when you have to be around someone quite often, when you are unified in such a deep way. And there's a lot of ways I think you can kind of test for whether you're emotionally immature. Ask yourself questions like, does your mood suddenly change? Can it suddenly change if something goes wrong? You have a flat tire, you can't find your favorite drink or food at the supermarket, it's out of stock, or you're on social media, or you're in some interpersonal situation, maybe a work situation, someone disagrees with you and you just implode. You just can't stop thinking about it. Or it greatly affects how you end up treating that person or the people around you that day or indefinitely. Do others seem to tiptoe around you? Do they feel like they're walking on eggshells because they don't want to set you off? And again, going back to the topic of disagreements, for me, I'm on social media a lot, so that's the example that comes to mind. Maybe for you though, work is a better example, or some kind of family situation. But how do you react to disagreements? Do you kind of naturally lean toward or end up resorting to personal jabs, mocking, trolling? And then also, what type of disagreement are we talking about? Do you become personal with others, or do you get really frustrated even if it's pretty innocuous disagreement or topic, something fairly benign, something that really should not be a hill to die on, but you've turned it into one because it just bothers you so much that someone disagrees with you? Also, along those lines, do you always feel like you need to have the last word? And it bothers you if you can't get in that final zinger, that final touche. What about this? Do you focus on negative comments to the exclusion of positive comments? So if somebody takes the time to, lay out why they liked something you did, but then at the end they offer one piece of constructive criticism, or maybe not even constructive, maybe they do kind of jab you, maybe they even insult you, is your mind just completely warped and all you can think about is that one negative? And so all you can think of is, how do I get retribution or vengeance for that one negative comment? That's definitely emotional immaturity. Or are you deeply concerned about whether others perceive you as being correct? Does it bother you greatly if you've failed to persuade someone or they haven't agreed to your way of thinking? Does that consume your mind? The phrase living rent free in someone's head, I think that is definitely associated with emotional immaturity. If somebody says something or does something, and again, maybe it could have actually been an insult, just a straight up insult, totally unfair, sinful. Does that person just live in your mind for who knows, hours, days, even weeks? So if this describes you, and again, this requires a lot of introspection, it's very easy to notice the sin or this weakness in others, but try to be as introspective as possible. Are you emotionally immature, or is this an area you can work on? And if it is an area you need to work on, well, the good news is this is like a muscle. Emotional maturity is like a muscle, and you can work it. You can build it and grow it. You can every day you will be in situations where you can work that muscle. I have children, so I'm regularly in situations where that muscle is getting worked. Another great opportunity to work that muscle is travel. My mom would always say, if you really want to get to know someone, travel with them. I absolutely agree with that. But if you're not in a position to travel right now, even just your social media usage, how you interact with anonymous people online, examine that. Like I said, do you implode or get really frustrated when people don't agree with you, even over innocuous topics? All right, let's move on to the next one, financial stability. I'm not going to pin numbers on this because financial stability can take a great number of forms depending on your living situation, where you live, etc. But in the most simple definition of financial stability, in my opinion, and this is more true for men than for women, but you should be able to support yourself. Are you able to support yourself? Because if you can't support yourself, then you're not going to be able to support a spouse. And you might say, well, I don't plan on supporting a spouse. I'm going to be in a dink household, dual income, no kids. I'll be a dink starting out until, a few years down the road when we have kids or whatever. I think that's kind of an unmasculine approach to marriage and a household. Like, even if you do want the dink lifestyle starting off, I still think as a baseline, you should be able as a man to support yourself and a spouse if necessary. So if you can't do that, I don't think you're in a position to start dating intentionally. You need to work on that, get your financial situation started or figured out. So many caveats and nuances here. Like, for example, I'm not going to say that two poor college students can never get married or whatever. There's so many possible exceptions, caveats, whatever. I just want to put this out generally, and hopefully you will have the wisdom to know whether my comments do apply directly to you, whether there needs to be some nuance added in there. And then also, I want to tie in the concept of time management, because time is money. How do you use your time? Is your default when you're not working or you're between jobs to just relax, indulge in kind of meaningless pleasures and activities? Think, well, I have no job, so yeah, I can just stay up till 4 a.m. every night. I'm playing Fortnite with the boys. That's really cool. No, it's actually unmasculine. It's not a commendable lifestyle. It's what men who lack self-control and aren't living with purpose do. And I am guilty of that, by the way. I'm very, very guilty of sloth, wasting time, using my time inefficiently, misplaced priorities in time management. Nevertheless, hopefully the time management component, you can see how that can tie into finances, and hopefully you can evaluate yourself and whether you are in a position to be leading a woman or in a relationship. Next up is physical fitness, and this is kind of long because I decided to give some more specific examples versus in the previous example where we talked about financial stability. I wanted to kind of keep that high level. I'm going to be a bit more specific in the physical fitness section, and maybe that's just because I'm more opinionated in this section. Anyway, general idea to start off this section. If you're single and you can't be healthy now, I wouldn't have high expectations that you're going to change your habits once you're married. Marriage, as you know, tends to have a debeautifying effect on people. People tend to kind of settle in and say, all right, going back to the finish line concept, I guess. It's like, all right, I'm here, I'm married. I don't need to worry about my looks as much, my food intake, my nutrition, my diet, etc. And so, the classic trope of the man or the woman letting themselves go is quite common in marriage. So I would take this very seriously. If you are not healthy now, or you're not taking physical fitness, health, nutrition, etc. seriously now, don't think you're going to take it seriously in marriage. And that's why I don't think you're ready for dating, for a long-term relationship. You do need to take that seriously. That does need to be a priority. So I can understand how I could get pushback on this section, because you might think, hey, this isn't absolutely essential. I don't have to be in tip-top shape in order to be in a relationship. No, I'm not saying you have to be in tip-top shape, but health should always be a priority for you. And if it's not a priority for you now, it's probably not going to become a priority for you in marriage. And health is a way, of course, to glorify God in your body and to bless your family by being, especially if you're a man, by being physically strong. It's going to make you more sexually attractive, which is going to benefit your marriage. It's going to give you that functional strength to be useful to your family. It's going to make you more able to protect your family. And the truth is, if you go to the typical church and look at the men, it's hard to say that a lot of Christian men look masculine. And I'm not talking about in some silly bodybuilder machismo sense, ripped muscles, veins, whatever. I'm just talking about health and functional strength and the ability to provide and help your family. It's emasculating to be weak. Guys, don't be weak. Don't be out of shape. So you're single now. I'm not going to say that every single person has a ton of time to focus on physical health, but chances are the majority of you do have time. Like, you could be making this a priority. And so again, if you have all this time now as a single person and you don't take it seriously, why do you think you're going to start taking it seriously once you're married or you're in a relationship and you have all these other obligations and things that are pulling on your time and pulling on you in so many different directions? So specific recommendations, I'm breaking this down into 3 categories: body fat percentage, cardio, and then strength. The strength section, I'm just focusing on men. I do think women should have a certain amount of strength, but I guess just for simplicity, decided to not give specific recommendations for women. If you're a woman and want to kind of adapt this for your own situation, feel free to do so. So starting with body fat, absolute minimum, and by minimum, I'm talking maximum body fat percentage. I'm using minimum in the sense that this is a pretty low bar. Body fat percentage. Guys, you have no excuse to not be at least at 20% body fat percentage. It's not hard to do. And that's kind of the point at which nobody's going to look at you and think you're out of shape, or you could possibly still look a little bit skinny fat depending on how much muscle you have. But a lot of Christian guys are floating around in that kind of mid-20s range. It doesn't need to be that way. It's not that hard to be here. It just requires some calorie counting, and then, as we'll talk later when I get into the strength section, it's not that hard to do a little bit of weightlifting 3 times a week. It's not a big ask. It doesn't require you to be a gym rat, so don't throw that excuse at me. Don't say that, oh, I'm focusing on godliness. I don't have time to go to the gym, and godliness is more profitable than physical fitness, like Paul said. No, that verse in 1 Corinthians gets ripped out of context, kicking and screaming. That verse is an acknowledgement that physical fitness is good. The point is that it's just not as important as godliness. So 20% for men, 26% for women. I will note, if you want to measure your body fat percentage, please don't use those stupid handheld devices. Those are wildly inaccurate. Those use a technique called biometric impedance. There are scales that do that much more effectively. And that's what I would recommend if you don't have access to something like a DEXA scan. In fact, yeah, I don't expect it. I don't expect anyone listening to this to go get a DEXA scan. They're expensive. They cost over $100. They're usually only available in larger cities because you have to go to a facility that has the DEXA scan equipment. Instead, what you can do, I think the biggest bang for your buck is go on Amazon, get a Renpho scale, RENPHO. That also uses biometric impedance, but it's more accurate than those handheld, excuse me, I have the hiccups, those handheld devices. And yeah, I mean, that's a small investment, guys. It's like $20 or $30, connects to your app. You can record your progress, all that. So 20% for men, 26% for women. This, by the way, this isn't even in what is considered the optimal range for pregnancy. Like for pregnancy, the optimal body fat range is 22 to 25%. So I'm being pretty generous here. I've actually heard some women, when I've talked to them about body fat percentage, use the excuse of like, oh, well, I don't want to get too slim because you need to have some amount of fat in order to be pregnant. Listen, the amount of fat you need to be pregnant is probably way less than you realize. Like if you're low 20s as a woman, you're gonna look good. You're gonna look really, really good. Like we're talking the 22 to 25% range. That's aesthetic for a woman. That's where you want to be. And I'm putting out there 26%, giving a little bit of leeway. Yeah, it's not hard to be at, but you may have to calorie count. All right, so those are the minimum. Preferably though, be at 15% for men. That's like right at the point when a lot of men can kind of start to see their abs, but you're not going to be shredded by any means. So again, I don't want to hear any nonsense about how you have to be a gym rat to do this. You absolutely don't. This is manageable with, you definitely have to be strength training or weightlifting, and then you have to be watching your caloric intake, eating sufficient protein. But this is absolutely doable, and it's absolutely maintainable year round. And then 22% for women, which is at the lower end of that optimal range for pregnancy, like I mentioned. And then in terms of strength, men, you should be able to bench press 2/3 of your body weight. If you can't, that's something you need to fix. Just going to be pretty blunt with you there. We're talking about 1 rep max here, by the way. This is not a big ask. If you can't do this, I'm just going to be blunt and say that you're weak. Likewise, you should be able to squat your body weight. Now, if you've never weightlifted at all, might take a couple months to get here. That's fine. I'm not trying to shame anyone, but you should be here. You should be weightlifting somewhat regularly so that you at least have this this level of strength. Preferably, though, you are weightlifting 2 to 3 times a week. And if you do that regularly, then after 6 months or a year, if you're pretty consistent using progressive overload, you should be able, and also you're at a healthy body weight, you should be able to bench press your body weight and squat 1.5 times your body weight. So that's what I would recommend you aim for. If you are at 15% body fat and you also have the strength level, nobody's going to look at you and not think you're in shape. Like you are going to look like you're in shape. You're going to have a body that looks strong and is strong. Again, let's forget the whole silly bodybuilder ripped machismo thing. You're not going to look like that. It's not what I'm talking about here. But you are going to look healthy and fit. All right, and then cardio. This is not as important as the other recommendations, but I'm just going to throw it in there because I think some amount of cardio is good and healthy. I think an absolute minimum, men and women should be able to run a 10-minute mile. That's 6 miles per hour. And then preferably they should be able to run an 8-minute mile, which is about 7 miles per hour. And by the way, this goal is a lot easier to achieve than this strength goal. All right, so that's going to finish out the section on physical fitness. Hopefully I was able to convince you that that ought to be a priority. And then last, but certainly not least, we have the topic of spiritual maturity. So if you hear spiritual maturity and you think I am referring to spiritual disciplines or spiritual activities like prayer, Bible reading, church attendance, ministry involvement, etc., then you would be dead wrong. And I'd even make the argument that if you think those are the ultimate litmus test for spiritual maturity, then you are probably spiritually immature yourself. And that's because the essence of Christianity is not behavior. The essence of Christianity is the gospel. It's everything God did in Jesus Christ for you, precisely because you are not well behaved. So we have to keep the gospel primary in Christianity, not the law. And that's what a lot of Christians fail to do, if they're even Christians. And that is definitely the hallmark, I'd say, of spiritual immaturity. And it greatly affects relationships. We're not talking in the abstract here, folks. This is highly relevant to how you're going to treat other people, especially your spouse. So tying into this topic of, the grace, the gospel, legalism, etc., I am of the strong opinion that humility is the single most desirable characteristic you ought to possess. If you want to have a healthy marriage, you should possess humility, and your spouse should possess humility. And the reason that's so important is because the opposite of humility is contempt or spiritual pride. And contempt, this is a fact, contempt is the number one predictor of divorce. Once your marriage gets to the point where one or both of you is convinced, maybe not bluntly, maybe it's not super overt, but just, in little ways you act toward one another, you think about one another. Once you are convinced that the other person is inferior to you, especially morally inferior to you, the writing is on the wall. The days are numbered for that marriage. Contempt is extremely toxic. It is definitely a marriage killer. And what breeds contempt, what causes contempt is legalism. That emphasis on this idea that the law is primary in Christianity, that the law is primary for spiritual health. You'll end up with this mindset that, hey, I'm good at keeping the law. I take the law really seriously, so I'm more sanctified than these people around me. I'm more sanctified than my spouse. You develop what's known as the holier than thou attitude. You might put them down because they aren't as well behaved as you, or they struggle more than you. And I've experienced this. I've experienced this on a very personal level in failed relationships in my own life. I know what it's like to be told basically, your struggle is illegitimate. You're just a pathetic sinner. You're just wallowing in your sin. You're down here. It's just absolute spiritual arrogance, spiritual pride. It's straight out of Luke 18, the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector, that kind of thing. And of course, I'm guilty of that too. We are all guilty of legalism, contempt, spiritual pride. So, we need to be constantly examining ourselves. Hopefully, though, I've made the case for you that, the litmus test, the fundamental marker of spiritual maturity is not behaviorism, it's not moralism, it's not religiosity, it's not checking off boxes. I did this today and this and this and this. No, rather it's the mindset of grace, of humility, that without Christ, without God, without his salvation, we're doomed. That's the reason we're good. And once we have that, the gospel embedded in our mind, it's going to flow out in how we treat our spouse when they're struggling, when they're sinning, because you are going to marry a sinner. If you end up marrying someone that you're really compatible with and they rarely seem to sin in ways that bothers you, or you're able to tolerate whatever ways they sin, great, congratulations, that's awesome. But that's almost just, luck. Not that I literally believe in luck, but you know what I mean. That's not a game plan. That's not a strategy. You can't decide that, my marriage is going to work because I'm just going to marry someone who doesn't fail me. I'm just going to marry someone who doesn't really sin much. It's not a game plan for a healthy marriage. Game plan for a healthy marriage is having a deep appreciation for your need for grace and humility. And then that's going to manifest itself in how you treat your spouse. So are the spiritual disciplines, as they're called, which I'm not a fan of that term at all, but anyway, you know what I mean. These spiritual activities like Bible reading, prayer, church involvement, ministry involvement, are they important? Absolutely. Should you be looking for those in your spouse? Absolutely. Yeah, those are not just wonderful things, but those are essential things. Those should be in our life. But if you think that those are the litmus test for spiritual maturity, then I think you are gravely mistaken. And also, if you think a lack of those just automatically means somebody is spiritually mature or immature, then I think you're gravely mistaken. So, long story short, spiritual maturity means putting the gospel first and the law second. So that is going to wrap it up. If you agree with something I said, disagree with something I said, you want to add in another insight, drop it in the comment below. I'd love to hear it. Let's get a discussion going. Also, if you want coaching from me, if you want to talk about your dating life, relationships, self-improvement, whatever, in the description of this video, you can see how to contact me. You can also look at my dating guide. It'll be linked down there at my self-improvement guide. And otherwise, please like, subscribe, tell a friend. And yeah, I appreciate you watching. So I'll see you in the next video.